Most coaches are blind to sex differences in males and females, and many women will acquire amenorrhea, hormone imbalances, adrenal insufficiency, GI distress, miscarriages, and much more throughout their lives, much of which is due to eating a low calorie diet chronically over time with limited or no proper recoverability techniques. Hey everybody, thank you so much for clicking on this video. If you landed on this video, chances are you're interested in the differences between male and female sex hormones, and you're interested in some of the modalities and the techniques that we utilize inside of our business, The Educated Dieter, to help a lot of our female clientele achieve amazing results globally. If you are, I made you a PowerPoint presentation that is the first module of an 11-part series that dives into all of the strategy that we utilize within our clientele here at The Educated Dieter. Go ahead, check out this first video, and please feel free to leave any questions you have down in the comments section. This PowerPoint presentation that I made for you is sure to open your eyes and help you better understand what considerations you need to make if you are coaching women or you're a woman right now looking to make improvements in her body composition. This course is called The Art of Female Fat Loss. ART stands for Applied Recovery Techniques. I wanted to make sure that you guys firmly understand this because all throughout this course, you are going to hear me say ART. So as I say ART, I want you guys to just be aware that that stands for Applied Recovery Techniques, because essentially that is what I feel like the industry right now as a whole is missing. Let's go. Module number one course outline. This is an introduction basically to the rest of the course. And I want to share with you all how all of this stuff came to be. Okay, so number one thing that we're going to be talking about is applied recovery techniques. What are they? How can you use them? Who I am and why you should care about that. What was the pivot point in my business? Because I've been doing this for 12 years now. What was the pivot point that allowed me to go from, turning people professional, winning world titles, and really trying to get people as lean as possible to actually focusing on health? My personal experience as a nutrition coach over the last 12 years, and then what expectations you guys should have when you are putting a female client through a fat loss phase. There should be things that you already know are going to happen. And as a direct side effect of that, with you being more experienced, you will be able to create protocols that basically allow you to think ahead of time, to actually be proactive in this journey and not be reactive in this journey. Okay. Why is there a lack of consideration for females specifically in the coaching industry? Anecdotal findings in the trenches. And again, this just comes from personal experience of working with a lot of women. Hypothalamic amenorrhea and period repair. We're going to be talking about that. And then at the very end, we're going to have some cited research. So for those of you research nerds like myself that want to dive into that stuff, you will be able to just either click on the links, or maybe I'll even provide an Excel sheet with all of the links on it, so you guys will have that at your disposal. There's probably likely, in all fairness, going to be probably at least 100, if not more, cited research links for this program at the very end. So I'll probably make that downloadable. So if you want to go ahead and come on over here and you can click the downloads, it should be in there. All right. So let's go ahead and get going with the next slide. So who am I? My name is William Grazione. I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science. I am a husband and father of 4 children. I am a man of faith, and I am the owner of The Educated Dieter Incorporated. Now, I do have 11, if not 12 years of experience, depending on when this program comes out. I also have 4 years of in-person personal training experience, where the majority of my clients were female. Okay. And then from a competition preparation perspective, I have helped individuals earn 49 pro cards and 5 world titles. Okay. And obviously in that work that I did, that body of work that I did to accumulate those titles from 2009, 2010, all the way up to about 2018, just until recently, this is where a lot of this was found. Okay. And again, I was put in a position where I just had to make a decision. So why should you care? And what was the pivot point? Now, all this stuff is going to tie in nicely, but essentially, I'm just trying to share my experience with all of you so that we can create a better future, a better 3, 5, 10-year future for all of our female clients down the road. Okay. So here's a reality. I've already done all the work for you. Okay. So you guys are here. you ladies are here, you coaches are here to essentially learn from the experience. So I've done the work, 11 plus years of it. I've coached well over 1,000 women at this point. I've failed so that you guys essentially don't have to. And I have found some amazing coaching methods that seem to work incredibly well for all of our clients of The Educated Dieter and for a lot of our clients over the last 5 years, once a lot of these things really started to, kind of come to the top of the surface. And I decided I was not going to ignore it any longer. All right. Now, what was the pivot point? So currently, online nutrition coaching is growing like crazy. If you look at some of these nutrition coaches in the nutrition business coaches in the industry, I mean, they're bringing on like 50, 60, sometimes even 100 new coaches every time they launch a new program. And to me, that's mind-boggling because I come from a time where I was just trying to convince people what macronutrients were and the fact that I could even coach people on a computer, not in person. And so with the industry booming the way that it is, it's going to be very, very important that we understand how many of those individuals are very surface level, how many of those individuals are coming into this space only understanding energy balance, calorie deficits, and really high intensity training programs to be able to get a client progress. Okay. But essentially what we're doing, and the whole premise of this course, is to basically combat the last 20 to 30 years of our industry pushing women into very high stress situations, specifically among a lot of the personal trainers and nutrition coaches that are in the industry right now, because that's all they have known for the last decade. So that's what they're going to continuously put out there because they are not putting themselves in a position to constantly be a student and to up-level their education. Okay. 70% of clientele is all female, and the inquiries dump in every day from failed attempts at epic body transformations and from previous coaches that didn't consider anything except for a calorie deficit and training the client 5 to 6 days a week. This is what we're trying to combat right now. Most coaches are blind to sex differences in males and females, and many women will acquire amenorrhea, hormone imbalances, adrenal insufficiency, GI distress, miscarriages, and much more throughout their lives, much of which is due to eating a low-calorie diet chronically over time with limited or no proper recoverability techniques. Insert applied recovery techniques. Okay. So what was the pivot point? And obviously you can see here, this is one of my previous clients, Altera. She's actually won multiple world titles, turned pro under my guidance, phenomenal lady. And I wanted to share this image because she was one of the very first clients that I started to coach where I realized that I could be in control of when she lost her cycle. Okay. Crazy to think about that, but throughout just a lot of experience and kind of playing around with carbohydrate cycling, we are actually able to see a dramatic difference from her very first prep with me to her second prep with me to her third prep with me. Okay. So what was the pivot point? So we have to start to look beyond what is just talked about in the evidence-based coaching space. Okay. Competition preparation coaching and what I noticed. So I was in a group of coaches back then. We were all friends. And what I noticed was that when I would bring up some of these issues that I was having with some of my female clients, they would essentially, kind of just chalk it up as not necessarily being a big deal, or they just wouldn't necessarily worry about it. And these issues that I was talking about were menstrual irregularities. So I would have females that would come to me, hey coach, I'm 9 weeks out and I missed my period. I haven't had a cycle, so on and so forth. And when I brought these things up to my colleagues, they would just chalk it up as being normal. Okay. Losing cycles normal. She lost her period. I'm not going to worry about it. She hasn't gotten her period back post show. I'm not going to worry about it, whatever it was, because essentially all they were kind of looking at was, can I get them stage lean? And then once we get them stage lean, we're essentially going to have them really try to go for it. And maybe it was turning pro or winning multiple shows or whatever it was. Okay. Now, one of the main issues was that I noticed that women that lost their period farther out had a greater likelihood of gaining weight after the show. Okay. So again, women that lost their cycle multiple months out had a greater likelihood of having a massive weight regain after the competition. All right. Now, this is where I think proactive and reactive thinking actually comes into play. All right. Now, this is what I mean. If a woman loses her cycle 12 weeks out, let's just say, okay, You have to understand that there are so many physiological things happening hormonally within that 12 weeks, pushing them as hard as possible. The body's trying to warn you at 12 weeks out that these things are happening. Okay, it's trying to warn you. But as a side effect of you being ignorant, showing your ego, I can get you lean, I'm not going to worry about the individual's health. What essentially ends up happening is that you're forcing a lot of hormonal imbalance within that female's physiology during that time. Now, if the female can keep her cycle as close to the show as possible, so just as an example, I just recently wrapped up working with a client that was able to keep her cycle all the way through, but she did have a light cycle, the cycle before the competition. So it was like a couple weeks out, I think 2 weeks out. She kept her cycle, but she had a light spotty cycle of about 3 days, and then her competition was 2 weeks later. In previous competition preparations, that same gal had lost her cycle multiple months out. Okay, so this is something that is very important to consider. And the consideration is that we were actually able to protect progesterone. And we're going to talk about that more because of these applied recovery techniques. Okay, so ideally, if you are pushing a female for fat loss and you're wanting to get them, pretty darn lean, you want to make sure that you are trying to keep their cycle healthy for as long as you possibly can. Okay. Now, one of the biggest problems in this industry, within the bodybuilding industry, and a lot of the time I'm going to be kind of going back and forth between lifestyle clients and bodybuilder clients, because so much of my career was predicated on both of them. One of them was forcing stress, turning people professional. The other one has been focused on recovering females from the work they're doing, maybe with other coaches. Okay. So once the client was lean, this is what I noticed in the industry, and this is what I feel like has kind of sparked a lot of the problems. Once the client got lean enough, all the coach cared about was making sure that they could hit every show that they could that year to just keep marketing that woman. So as an example, they would get a week out, boom, progress photos go up. They win the show, boom, progress photos go up. Then maybe they start a short reverse diet, boom, progress photos go up. Then they're competing in another show, another show, another show, another show, another show. And then at the end of that saga, they look worse in the last show than they did in the first show. And then, God forbid, they go out and get labs done, which I would highly recommend all of you here really start to learn more about lab work, blood work, specifically for your female clients. Labs were trash, absolute trash. So we have low testosterone, bottomed out progesterone, maybe low or high estrogen, very high cortisol, among a myriad of other things. There are a lot of issues that can occur if you keep a gal like this too lean for too long. Now, this is where the concept of nutritional periodization comes into play, because we're going to be talking about how to plan these things out. And like I said previously, this is a long course. Okay, I think we're going to end up finishing with 8, 9, or 10 modules here, and there's going to be a lot of things to talk about. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. So at that time, when I realized that people were pushing these women, doing too much, they're just forcing all this stress on the body, a decision had to be made for me. Okay, I was either going to ignore it like they chose to, or I was going to kind of take the problem head on and actually start to really try to help a lot of these women that were put in this position. So I decided, hey, I'm going to invent some things. I'm going to try some things. I'm going to learn. If I fail, I fail, but I'm going to learn and I'm going to fail forward, because I know that what I'm doing has the opportunity to actually protect their health. And in my opinion, as a nutrition coach, if your clients know that their health is your number one concern, they're going to be with you for a long time. Okay. So I started to experiment with refeed strategies, supplementation strategies, and things like that would be very beneficial during times where women were going into their menstruation cycle. Okay. Because I felt like the more I could protect that time, 3-4 days before, the more likely they were to have a period. Okay. So like I said, we tried, we failed, we learned, and we progressed forward. I developed systems that would work with the female body versus constantly beating it down with improper planning and guidance, leading many women later on in life to develop insulin resistance, obesity, eating disorders, and hormonal dysfunction. Applied recovery techniques were implemented, and health became the focus for me as a coach, which I hope it does for you as well. So why the lack of concern? Why in our industry is there a lack of concern for women's health? Okay. So I think it's a couple different folds. Number one, I think that in order for individuals that have built entire huge businesses and
all of these products that have been created around calorie deficits, a lot of it, for them to open their eyes up, they would have to basically decide, hey, like, what about everything that I've already done to this point? So I call it, the inevitable of reinventing the wheel. Now, I don't want to say reinventing the calorie deficit wheel. However, there's more things to consider here than just putting people into a calorie deficit. All right. So you have to address sex differences. And this is essentially very hard for other nutrition coaches to replicate. This is very hard for other businesses to replicate. This would be very hard to try to create something that would just fit everybody, because Lord knows that's not the way that all this works. And it's not very marketable. Okay. So if you look at calorie deficit, super intense training programs, things like that, that stuff is very marketable. Even things like carbohydrate cycling can be marketable. But a lot of the people that are marketing these things, they're not creating them specifically for the N of one. They are just creating them for a mass number of individuals. And then they're marketing to those people. Okay. Now, why is there not more research done on this stuff? Essentially because, keep in mind that I am friends with individuals that work in that space, that work in the research space, and all that I hear about is funding. Okay. So it would be very hard to take X amount of women, have them all get bloods done, have them go through training programs, have them get more bloods done, regulate their diet, so on and so forth for 8, 12, 16 weeks in a row, and then look at the evidence. The blood work and the limitation of funding for things like that is essentially why, personally, I feel like nothing has been done to this point, because if you guys follow the data, you guys actually know that, hey, like, they just came out with data supporting multiple day refeeds and diet breaks, like the Matador study and stuff like that. So to go this extra mile would be a lot for any researcher. So I don't blame the researchers. I don't blame the science. I just believe that we are multiple years ahead of the research and the science. So you have to think about it like this. A lot of researchers and scientists, where do they get their ideas from? They get it from us, the in the trenches nutrition coaches. So they can actually come to us and they can say, hey, Will, what's going on here? What have you been trying? What's working? What's not working? What do you think we should do next? Right. And that's how a lot of these studies have been created over the last 10 years, from individuals that are wherever university that they're studying at. I don't want to name drop anybody, but whatever university, whatever specialist is doing this, they're essentially just trying to validate what we essentially have already been doing for the last few years. And then, like I said, it's a good idea to try to stay multiple years ahead. Okay. So if the calorie deficit works right now, and I think this is the mindset that most coaches have, if the calorie deficit and the training program is working right now, right, and the client's seeing progress, why would I change this? Here's what I mean. A vanity metric in the fact that most nutrition coaches, if they can create a before and after, they're winning, because they can market the heck out of that and then they can get more client inquiries. However, in my opinion, we have to think proactively. We have to be able to think about, well, if it's working right now, sure. But what happens when it stops working? What are we going to do then? What are we going to do when the client is not responding anymore? They lose their cycle and they're starting to have some biofeedback symptoms that you're not necessarily sure what to do with. Okay. So for all women that have, that the calorie deficit does not work for, these are the women that we need to be focusing on, because here's what I can tell you. I have worked with so many women, and some of them have been chronically high stress women. What I mean is that they're trapped in a sympathetic dominant nervous system state. Okay. And I take them and I will put them into a calorie deficit. And do you know what happens? Stress goes up, blood sugar actually goes up, does not come down. Okay. So this is a term coined as metabolic resistance. Okay. And that's just one of the physiological side effects that occur in these very high stressed individuals. But why should we care so much? It's for the people that don't respond the way that they should. It's for all the people that don't respond in the manner of, here's your calorie deficit and macros, here's your training program, here's your cardio, here's your supplements, go. And they don't respond. This is why I wanted to create this course. I also wanted to create this course to essentially protect the female physiology, because I know that there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of coaches out there that are doing exactly what I just said, okay, and have no care for the hormonal health of their clients. All right, so what opened the can for me? Obviously, you can see here, there's a client transformation. And this was actually right about the time in which I really started to open my eyes up. I think these This photo, this progress photo was taken, I think, about 2015, somewhere around there. So the anecdotal findings in the trenches, like I told you guys, I was a competition preparation coach for a very long period of time. And in that, obviously, we are trying to force a lot of stress on the body. Okay. We are trying to reach extreme levels of leanness. We're really trying to just do things that the female body is not supposed to do. Okay. So why do I care so much? Well, I was raised in a home with women. I was raised by a single mother. I had a sister, and then obviously once I got into my relationship with my wife, she had a daughter, and then our first child was a daughter. And so I was surrounded by a lot of girls, right? And I just knew, based off of my upbringing, based off of my life, that there were some things here that I should probably be open-minded to, specifically because you can watch, right, the psychology of a woman change throughout the month. And if you're actually in tune, you can actually sense the physiology changing too. Now, I happen to have, I guess, a pretty good level of experience with this because, like I said, I was a personal trainer to women for 4 years, right? And then also after that, I would always train with my wife, right? So I would just monitor things and I'd wonder, how come some days she feels stronger than other days? How come during some times in the cycle, she'd be super strong, like breaking PRs, but then other times in her cycle, she would be super low energy, just not feeling it, things like that. And so these things had to be investigated. So in preps, I would notice menstrual irregularities, but chalked it up as normal athletic side effects of being very lean and low energy availability. All my mentors at the time also didn't pay attention to it. And this is coined as the female athlete triad back then, but since then it has been changed to relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S. And you will hear me talk about that quite a bit. Okay. I noticed that with less refeeds, women would lose their cycles much faster. However, the sooner they lost it, the harder it was to get back. 4 weeks out versus 4 weeks out, we already dove into that a little bit. So with more applied recovery techniques, methods applied, the same women could keep their cycle even while achieving a very lean competition winning physique. Now, at the time, I wasn't sure this was reality. I didn't think this was possible. But what I noticed was that I was having women go through competition preparations, would legit get their period maybe during peak week or on show day or something like that. And they were lean enough and they would win competitions. And so this is really what opened my eyes up to the reality that, hey, we don't have to just focus on one. Like, we can actually have both. Now, will it happen all the time? No. However, if I can focus on both and I can keep the person healthy after the competition, that was my goal, because so many people come into this sport. So many people are just chewed up, they're beat to crap, and then they're spit out. And then they just have this crazy rebound and they don't even look like they ever competed before. Okay. So this is why we're doing this, is to be able to protect them later on in life. All right. Because these women that are doing a lot of this stuff, it's not for the right now, or at least it shouldn't be. It should be for the next, 5-10 years. Like, how is this going to help them better understand their body, their physiology for the next 5 to 10 years? And as an industry, this is where we have to do a better job. Okay. So, like I said, it didn't happen all the time, but I knew we were onto something that would keep women healthier while achieving an epic transformation. The women who use the applied recovery technique methods also got their cycles back if they lost it much faster post-show, sometimes even as soon as the first cycle back. Okay. When you can get your hormones back in balance this quickly, you can start to make muscle building progress sooner rather than later and experience less hormonal side effects. Okay. So I want to paint this picture for y'all. Most of the women that will diet down super aggressive for either a competition or not a competition, just for a lifestyle cut, and then they start reverse dieting immediately after, you have to be very cautious of this transition, okay, because of the stress and the hormonal imbalances that may have been accumulated during that time. And you want to make sure that they can transition back into getting their cycle and balancing their hormones as soon as possible. That way you can make sure that they are actually building muscle and essentially limiting the amount of body fat that they gain back immediately after a diet. Okay. All right. So what was actually occurring? Hypothalamic amenorrhea was occurring within these females that, they would lose their cycle way too soon. Okay. Now, this is very common in athletics or physique sport. And like I said previously, it was known as the female athlete triad. So there's a lot of research on this revolving around female athletes, whether it be track runners or really any female athlete that really tries to maintain a nice, lean, muscular physique year round, but is also working their tail off, okay, to maybe get ready for things like the Olympics or something like that, okay? So the female athlete triad is a combination of 3 interrelated conditions pertaining to disordered eating or negative self-image: amenorrhea and osteoporosis, okay? In medical, they would look for fatigue, anemia, electrolyte abnormalities, and or depression. Now, think about this in terms of your clients, or maybe your physique development clients, or people that are dieting. Think about this. Do they have fatigue? Do they get anemia? A lot of women are anemic, but if you're not looking at labs, you wouldn't know that. Electrolyte abnormalities and depression. Okay. So think about electrolyte abnormalities as being maybe working with a bro coach that eliminates sodium and electrolytes out of somebody's diet, right? So remember those things: fatigue, anemia, electrolyte abnormalities, and depression. Okay. Now, these things work hand in hand with physiology or psychology and the stress on the body. All right. The ability to preserve menstruation has a lot to do with preventing progesterone, or protecting progesterone. Sorry about that. Has a lot to do with protecting progesterone, which is the calming hormone in the female physiology. Now, for some of you, this may be the very first time that you're even hearing about progesterone. And I can completely understand where you're coming from, because, had you have brought this up to me 7, 8 years ago, it would have been totally over my head as well. But here's what I would advise y'all to do. If I say any words or anything like that, I would strongly advise that you guys just go look the word up to gain a better understanding of essentially what it means, okay? Or look the hormone up, all right? So we have to protect progesterone and manage cortisol to the best of your ability. Why do we have to worry about hormones now? I've only learned about calories in, calories out, and energy balance. Well, here's the thing, is that in the female physiology, progesterone and cortisol cannot be mutually exclusive of one another. They cannot be level, okay? It's kind of like a seesaw, okay? If cortisol is high, progesterone's low, okay? If progesterone's high, stress is low. And essentially in the female physiology, you want to keep progesterone happy, healthy, okay, while maybe fluctuating a little bit here or there. But once you start to tip this thing too much, this is where menstrual cycle abnormalities occur, okay? There is a need to track your female client cycles to ensure time of the cycle. Okay, so if you guys aren't tracking your female client cycles, I would strongly advise that you do that in your Excel spreadsheets. It's super easy. All you got to do is say, hey, can you go ahead and highlight, your cycle, that when you start and when you end in your client tracker sheet. And they can use pink, red, purple, whatever color they want to use, but at least every single month, maybe when you have your big update with them, or maybe you book a Zoom call with them every month, or you have your weekly email updates, however you operate as a coach, what you're going to be able to do is say, all right, last month we had, a 6-day cycle. Cycle was fine. We have 28 days after that, another 6-day cycle, 28 days, right? And you can track this to make sure that it's healthy and that it's consistent. Okay. So you want to make sure that you're tracking this, and you want to make sure that everything matches from cycle to cycle in a fat loss phase. Okay. Because here's what you're going to start to notice is that over the course of time, if you're pushing them hard enough, okay, if you're pushing them hard enough, those cycles from 6 days and being full may start to tip back. Maybe then it becomes a 5-day cycle. Maybe it becomes a 4-day cycle. Maybe it becomes a 3-day cycle. Okay. And then after that, the cycle will maybe turn into kind of just spotting. Okay. And then it'll be extremely light, and then it's gone. You have to make sure that you are protecting that cycle by protecting progesterone and stress on the body. Okay. So like I said, tracking trends to spot upcoming irregularities. You want to be able to track these trends to essentially be proactive in thinking about this stuff in the future, to think, all right, well, if she's already down here, maybe cycle went from 6 days to 3 days, maybe she went from having a full cycle to having a spotty cycle. We should probably implement something, okay, that's going to help lower stress, increase progesterone, and get her cycle back on track for the next 2 to 3 weeks where we can put her back into a fat loss phase and she can keep progressing. Because like I said, you can kind of ride this balance of cortisol and progesterone. And as long as you're protecting progesterone with some of these applied recovery techniques, you will be able to keep that female client's cycle pretty healthy. Okay. So like I said, in many cases, the signs will be clear and there's more on this to come. So period repair, how do I do it? Okay. So the concept and why this happens. So everything starts with the hypothalamus, okay? Hypothalamic pituitary axis, you can call it the HPA, you can call it the HPTA. And this is the control center of your entire body, okay? Now the control center adapts. So you want to think about it like this. The HPTA sends signals that are sent out throughout the system to dictate overall health, basically like a monthly report card for a woman, okay? All these signals are constantly in communication with each other, okay? They're always in communication. And then maybe let's say your cycle is supposed to be coming, right? And then your body senses an energy deprivation, something stalls, okay? The wheel is no longer working the right way. There was a speed bump, got thrown off track, and now there may potentially be a negative feedback. And that negative feedback typically is correlated to some form of stress, and then how that stress impacts progesterone. So stress is physiological and psychological, and it is taken into consideration each month to determine if you're in a good enough place to menstruate, or if your female client is in a good enough position to menstruate. Okay. So you want to think about this cycle that I said, okay, the control center, it adapts and sends signals constantly throughout the body. If it senses that there's an energy deprivation, whether that be from training or low calories or whatever it is, what it's doing is it negatively influences the signals that are being sent to follicle stimulating hormone, okay, and luteinizing hormone. All right. Now, physiological, this could also be training. So relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S, typically has an association with cardio, energy burn, training, total calories, and low carbohydrates. Okay. Now notice here that I said less than 150 to 200 grams. That's because anytime that I've seen menstrual irregularities happen, typically it's when carbohydrates are sub 150. Somewhere around there. Now, for the most elite metabolic monster, okay, maybe they could start to occur maybe north of 150. But I can tell you that I haven't seen it too often, but I wanted to make sure I highlighted that just because I have seen it before, okay? But I will say this, most women will lose the most body fat around 120 grams to 140 grams of carbohydrate on their low carbohydrate days, all right? Now, for many, training isn't the issue. Okay, I want to be very clear with this. For many, the training actually isn't the problem. Okay, eating enough to support the recovery is the problem. Okay, now most are in a RED-S state due to their nutrition intake and or being too lean. That energy availability is not available to support normal menstruation. Okay, so psychological things you want to think about is stress. You want to think about their work life. You want to think about their life, their relationship, their marital status, boyfriend, girlfriend, having problems, whatever's going on, or family issues. Okay. Now, I've even taken some of these psychological things that I noticed through biofeedback of working with our clients. Now, for those of you who don't know what biofeedback is essentially just understanding various things about the individual's physiology that, in my opinion, should be non-negotiables to be able to make sure that they can stay as healthy as possible while you're coaching them. So as an example, a quality of sleep, how much stress are they under? What's going on with the family? Are they having a normal bowel movement every day? Things like this. How's their sleep? Things like this need to be considered. Okay. Are you feeling like you are recovering every week from training? Or do you feel like your training and the recoverability and the soreness and the fatigue is actually carrying over into week 2, into week 3, into week 4? Now, if that actually happens, well, guess what? You can actually lose your cycle because you're training too hard. Okay. Maybe your calories are in a great place, but because you're training too hard, now we have again created this energy efficiency in which your body can't recover. Okay. So there's not enough to support proper recoverability, and thus you can lose your cycle from training too hard. I'll just give you guys a quick example because obviously I think stories are important. But I had a client that I just got done working with for 80 weeks. Okay. And when she first started with me, she was training 6 days a week, doing a very well-known individual's training program that's available online. And they do a lot of glute stuff and things like that. And it wasn't that her calories weren't in a good enough place, that she was just training too hard. So there was some form of imbalance there. And when we adjusted her training, we adjusted her macronutrients, we supplied proper supplementation to help get everything back in line. What essentially ended up happening was that she got her cycle back after a couple months, right? And then we built her metabolism back up with lower training intensity. And we just kept trying to increase the food, limiting her weight gain. And then we were able to get her to a phenomenal place where, guess what? We could actually start a fat loss phase. Okay. So just because the individual's calories may be in a good place does not necessarily mean that they will have a normal period if they are training balls to the wall all the time. Okay. Now, content on birth control, things like that, that's going to be coming up much later. But I wanted to dive into period repair part 2. And essentially, this is basically a 5-step process to getting your client's period back. I wanted to make sure that I could effectively give you guys something immediately in this very first module, other than just a lot of experience. So this is for non-hormonal birth control women. All right. Now, like I said, we will be talking more about birth control later on. So this is for youthful women, 28 to 45 years old. I think it's important to also highlight this, though, that things like perimenopause are actually starting a lot earlier in women, essentially because a lot of this hormone dysfunction, a lot of the medications and birth controls that women are taking later on in life. So the normal age is typically 48 to 51 years old, where they should start to experience some form of perimenopause. However, I have talked to women that are in their early 40s that are already experiencing perimenopause symptoms. I've even talked to women that are in their late 30s that are experiencing perimenopause symptoms, but a lot of that is due to the hormone imbalances and the things that they've done to get them to that point. So this is for adult women. 21 to 35-day cycles are common. And again, you must track these. Okay. So here's the 5-step process that I use to getting your client's period back. Number 1 is to reduce physical exercise and cardio. Okay. Obviously, we haven't talked about cardio yet, but a lot of women are just cardio bunnies. They love to go into the gym, do a lot of cardio to get their sweat on, because I think it's going to help them get toned. Obviously, that is not the reality. And we will be talking about how to periodize all of that stuff later on. So maybe you go from training 6 days a week on your own to dropping them down to 3 or 4 days per week. And I think it's very intelligent as a coach in your position to have, a 3-day routine, 4-day routine, 5-day routine, basically as templates. And then you can kind of auto populate them based off of the individual. So with the client that I was working with that I said wasn't having a cycle because she was training too hard, we actually bumped her down to only 3 days a week. Okay. Now she was freaking out at first, but I basically told her, I'm like, hey, like, what do you like to do? What else do you like to do besides lift? And she's like, oh, well, I really like to read books and I'm very infatuated with education. So I was like, perfect. The days you're not training, just focus on growing your brain instead of growing your muscles. And that app actually worked out really, really well for her, because most people, when they get addicted to working out, they put things off to the side that actually make them calm them down, make them less stressed out. And so keep in mind that resistance training in and of itself is actually stressful on a lot of these people. So we have to be able to pull that away. Now, you want to reduce cardio by half or less. Now, over the course of time, as we are trying to get a client's cycle back, I actually want them not doing much cardio at all, besides maybe a 5 to 10 minute warm up pre-training. Okay. Now, if they're sitting on their butt all day because they work in front of a computer screen, then I think having maybe a daily walk or something like that just to break up the day can be very beneficial. Most of the time, I'm asking these women to get between like 6,000 and 10,000 steps per day, predicated on their lifestyle. All right. So rule number 1, reduce excessive physical activity. Okay. Number 2 is work on improving your sleep quality and reduce all stimulants after 2 p.m. Now, some individuals find themselves in a position where they develop adrenal insufficiency. And we're not going to dive too deep into that, but all I can say is that the world is overstimulated right now. The world is down in Starbucks at 6 o'clock, in the evening, and then trying to go to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock, and they can't sleep, right? Women are laying their heads down on the pillows at night, and they're wondering, like, why can't I fall asleep? Well, it's because you just took 2 scoops of pre-workout to the dome at 5 p.m., right? So think about this stuff. You want to reduce stimulants after 2 p.m. Now, if you want to get a little bit more serious about it, you could even have them do an adrenal detox or a liver adrenal GI detox, which we can talk about that later on. But just to improve the adrenal insufficiency, in my opinion, the best thing you can do is just cut their caffeine down by at least half. If you want to basically kind of detox them from caffeine, you can totally do that. Normally, they'll start to feel better after 5 to 7 days. Okay. Now, what I mean by feel better is they'll actually feel the stimulant. So if you were to be basically ODing on caffeine and Monster energy drinks and stuff like that, you could drink a Monster and not feel anything. Some of you may have already been there before. However, if you do this, adrenal detox, typically liver, adrenal, GI, they're all kind of done together. And then you have a cup of coffee. I'm telling you right now, because I just got done doing one right before I got COVID. You are freaking lined up. You are in the zone. I mean, for hours. Okay. And this is the way that these stimulants should actually work on our physiology. However, so many people have become dependent on them that now we're basically living in a world where there's caffeine and everything. I mean, just think about this. You go to the store, you buy a Diet Coke. Nobody expects there to be almost 100 milligrams of caffeine in a Diet Coke. But guess what? In that one container, and people are giving these things to their kids too. Look at all the high school kids that are chugging bangs and stuff. This is going to be a very serious problem, in the next few years, because there's just no user awareness. Okay. So like I said, number 2, work to improve sleep quality by reducing all stimulants after 2 p.m. As long as you do that, you should be fine. Consider vitamin D, 100%, vitamin D3, sublingual, dissolvable in the mouth, zinc, magnesium, ashwagandha, supplementation stack, pre-bed. Okay. Now, primarily, most people, if we're looking at blood work, which I know this is not a hormone course, but I think it's extremely important to bring this up because a lot of these things really do flow into each other very, very nicely when we're talking about hormones and labs and things like that. I've got some blood work right here that this is actually from one of my clients. And she was actually very low vitamin D. Vitamin D was like an 18. Okay. Now, the sublingual vitamin D that I like to recommend, I've seen it take women from being 15, 16, 17, 18, 20s, all the way up to being at 100 in less than 2-3 months. Okay. So I do recommend a sublingual vitamin D. You can find that on Amazon. As far as zinc, magnesium, ashwagandha, I think just as like calming, adaptogenic herbs and supplementation, I think many of these are almost, I could almost recommend these to just about anybody, because based off of what I've seen, everybody's likely deficient in these things, and these things can also help many, many people. So without looking at blood work, I would probably recommend most of these supplements as standalone products. Number 3 is you got to get food up. Okay. Mainly carbohydrates and fats. Obviously, fats do support, healthy endocrine system and hormone function. And then carbohydrates also help to release serotonin. They calm the body. Calming the body helps to elevate progesterone. And this can get women in a much better position. Okay. Raise fats up to at least 60 grams per day. This is variable depending on the individual, but I will say if you're trying to get their cycle back, at least 60 or more, and carbs up to at least 150 grams per day. Now, I'll also say that there are some instances where women have hormonal dysfunction where they can't really metabolize that many grams of carbohydrates. And if that's the case, there may also be some GI problems that we need to be able to address. And in many cases, utilizing some form of a detoxification phase in the first couple of weeks of working with this client, that would be ideal to help them jumpstart their metabolism. Because essentially the way that you want to think about it is if they have never done any form of detox, you are basically working with the absorption quality or the absorption quality that's been negatively influenced by the way that they've treated their body for the last 20 years. Okay. Just as an example. And we will talk about that a bit later, but regardless, you got to get calories up. You got to feed them up. Okay. Number 4 is to manage daily stress by creating a power list and taking calming walks or short work breaks. All right. Number 5, be consistent with this. The female physiology is built on estrogen and progesterone, the calming hormone. Chaseberry or beeswax supplementation can also help with this. We need to prioritize that until the cycle comes back. It will come back. My longest case was about 9 months, but the gals hadn't had a cycle for over 16 months due to excessive exercise and malnutrition. Most of the women that I help get their periods back that are normal women that have just lost it because of their, overtraining, under eating, things like that, high stress situations, family occurrences, and things like this. Most of them can get them back in 3 to 4 months, somewhere around there. But like I said, this case hadn't had one for well over a year, and it took us 9 months. Okay. So let's go ahead and move forward. So wrapping all this up.
All right, if you happen to make it to the end of that video, congratulations. You've taken one step forward to furthering being able to understand the female physiology and the very things you need to be able to consider when you're working with female clientele. Thank you so much for watching that entire first module of an 11-point PowerPoint presentation that I created well over a year ago. If you found a lot of value in that presentation, just go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I'd really appreciate it. And if you're interested in the next 10 modules of this specific course, you can just go ahead and you can contact me directly. It's william@theeducateddietr.com. There will be links in the description. You can just contact me one-on-one. Thank you so much for tuning in to this educational video. I appreciate your time. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video.